Okay, so today we are going to be taking a super close look at the employee information, or what's commonly called the employee profile. I know that many of you probably know, the vast majority of, the items that can be stored or entered onto this, this page. But I just kind of wanted to go over each item in depth and just kind of point some things out, maybe discuss, some things in some pretty good detail, like the profiles in particular, because I'm guessing there might be some of you who know which profiles to fill out, but maybe don't know what the profiles actually do in the system. So we'll discuss that. And I'll point out a few other things as well. So I'm currently logged into our demo company here. We're taking a look at the employee information or profile for Casey Jones, the employee that we like to use as an example a lot. As we can see here up at the top right, top left, we have account information. So this would be username, actual employee name, a salutation or suffix if you would like to add that, and nickname if they goes by something other than their actual first name. You can actually set the employee's first screen here. Now, we usually have the first screen set up by default according to their security profile. So what that usually means is that an employee might see, might log into the system and see their timesheet or maybe their pay statements. If you have, if you just have payroll with us, maybe it'll take them directly to their pay statements. Managers and supervisors tend to see their dashboards, right? As do company admins, usually dashboards as well. Well, if you would like to actually set a specific first screen to someone, you can do that in here, of course, by just clicking the lookup button and then choosing the first screen that you would actually like to assign to them. So in this case, we can choose dashboard, we can choose the employee's current timesheet, historical timesheets, their schedule, the request time off page, you can choose that as the first screen, their pay statements, saved reports, or the new UI dashboard, which will be coming up soon. Okay, from there we actually have locale, which this is kind of interesting because this is where we can set up different languages in the system. So by default, we always have English in there, but we can also add a number of other languages such as Dutch, Australian English, UK English, French, Canadian French, and also Spanish. So if you have, if you have employees who, English isn't their first language, or maybe even isn't a language for them at all, you can come in here. We can create, if you'd like for us to create a locale profile for you, we can do that. Or if you want to come in here and create one yourself, that's certainly a possibility as well. So I know that we do have a number of clients that have Spanish set up. We might also have a few with French too. I can't recall, but that is an option that a number of people don't know about. So that would be here under locale. Underneath that, time zone, and something else that's really important. Maybe you have employees, who work in a satellite office, or maybe you have multiple offices and they're not always in the same time zone, right? But you can actually change the time zone for a specific employee depending on what their time zone is. And what that does is that will change the clock that actually shows up for them when they log in, and that will change their timesheet, the punches that they see on their timesheet when they clock in and out, so it actually matches their local time. Underneath that, we have a couple of boxes here. We have user must change password at next login. So that kind of works in tandem here with new password. You can actually assign the employee a new password. If they forget what theirs is and they haven't reset it themselves, you can change it for them. Now, if you do change that for them, just remember that the new password that you enter for them right here has to follow the same guidelines as if they were to create a password themselves. So it must be at least 8 characters long, and include at least one number, one symbol, and have, at least one uppercase letter as well. Well, I suppose one uppercase letter and at least one lowercase letter too. So then if you do give them a new password, you can tell them, you can check that, and they'll have to change it to something of their own devising the next time they log in. Now, sometimes, if they enter their password incorrectly too many times, they'll be locked out. That box will be checked. You can just uncheck that box and click save in order to unlock their account. Another time you might see this box checked would be for terminated employees. Terminated employees are automatically locked by the system on termination. So if you have a terminated employee who needs access to pay statements, if you don't want to pull those for them, you can uncheck that locked box, let them access the system, get what they need, and then lock it again afterwards. Below that, we have security question. The employee can actually fill out their own security question if they would like to have that as being part of the process to reset their password. They can do that as well. Or, and if they do fill it out, you can see their question and answer here, or you can even fill it out for them if you would like. Over here on the left is the new employee perspectives box. If you have employee, Tony spoke about this in a training session previously. If you have employee perspectives created in your system, it will show here for the employee. Scrolling down a little bit here on the right, we have personal information. So this would be the employee ID for them in the system. It would be their social security number, their account status, so whether they're active or terminated, or some of you folks maybe have an account manager or temp account status. That would be there as well. Email addresses, phone numbers, those show up as well. Now here under not selected, you'll see that this is actually a country. So if they're not in the United States, you can actually choose, what the prefix is, and then have their number after that. Underneath that, address. Now, we can actually have the system, you can enter an address, right? And if you don't, maybe you're not spelling out street all the way, maybe you just put ST for street, right? And you don't have maybe you don't have the city in there either, or the state. You don't have to start with those, because after you put the zip, we can click the recommend button, and the system will actually fill out, so in this case, we're even missing a direction, we're missing east. So we can click apply, and the system will fill in all that good information for us. And then over here on the right of that, we actually have the latitude and longitude of that address. We have locals. So for Indiana, locals are a big thing. Ohio, locals are a big thing as well. Also in Kentucky. You can actually override the locals from here if you want. So, we can pay someone we can make it look like someone's living in a different county if need be. That doesn't come up very often, but it is an option. Then finally, we have the map button here. We can actually click on here and we can view a Google map of where that address is located. All right, back here on the left, two-factor authentication. So this would be the virtual code that everyone has to enter every time they log into the system, right? Now, there's really only one thing that you can do here, and that's click the clear virtual code settings. And when does that come in handy? Well, that comes in handy when the employee gets a new phone number or they change their email address and they need to change their virtual code to that new phone number or email address. So after, I don't need to scroll up, after you change that email address or phone number here in the system, you'll want to click, and then you save, of course, you'll want to clear the virtual code settings, because what that will do is if the employee, if they were bypassing the virtual code by having, a cookie saved on whatever computer they're using, whether it's their home or work computer, it will make them do the virtual code the next time they log in, and they'll have to do that virtual code setup again. where it will pull the information from the system and ask them to verify that or enter a different phone number, email address if they would like, and then send a virtual code to that new, email address or phone number. And so to reiterate that, first you'll want to enter the new email address or phone number, then, save the change and then clear the virtual code settings. And the next time they log in, they will have to do that setup again for the new information that they've provided. Okay, so let's take a look at profiles now. This was going to be the big one that I was really going to focus on here on the main tab. So let's just kind of go through these. I may skip a few of them. Okay, so starting with access. Access would be access restrictions according to IP addresses. So we can actually, and this can actually be done in one of two places. We can, here on the employee's profile, if we assign them an access profile, then that means that they can only access their account, from one of the IP addresses in that access profile. So typically these would be IP addresses of their work location, right? So that means that, their work location, if that's what the IP address is, or IP addresses are, would be the only place they could clock in and clock out, but also the only places where they could request time off, where they could view their pay statements and download those, and really do anything in the system. If they weren't logging in from one of those IP addresses, then they wouldn't be able to access the system whatsoever. So I said that there were two places we could do this. The other place is that we can assign it in the timesheet profile. So we'll get down to the timesheet profile here in a little bit, but essentially assigning it on the timesheet profile just restricts their punching in and out. At home, they can still go in, they can view their pay statements, they can request time off, they can see their schedule, they just can't clock in and out. So usually the access profile is left blank. We don't have very many people who are restricting entire access to the system. Most of the access restriction is done on the timesheets. All right, next up, accruals. Pretty easy. This is our time off. If we have accrual profile set up for you in the system, this is the profile that's assigned. This is what determines how often and how much time off they accrue. Next one is the attestation profile. This is an additional module that can be added to the system. If it is turned on, you will see it here. And if it's an employee who needs to complete attestation, this would be the profile that would be assigned to them. Underneath that would be benefit. The benefits profile is, if you have your employees going through open enrollment with us, if selecting their benefits through the system, then this would be the profile that would be that would control that. So if you only have one set of benefits that you're offering, then more than likely all of the employees would be assigned to the same benefit profile. However, if you have a couple of different sets depending on employee types, then you might have a couple different benefit profiles. But again, that would be if you have employees selecting benefits in the system, whether it be your open enrollment or life change events. Going to skip competency, demographic, those don't come up very often. Employee perspectives, again, that goes along with what Tony talked about previously in the employee perspectives box up here. Holiday table. So this would be what holidays that the employee is eligible for. So, most of our clients, I would say, have one holiday table, but there are some that have multiple. One group of employees might have this number of holidays off, or maybe you have employees who work, different hours per workday. So maybe you have, some employees who get 8 hours per holiday, where you have other employees who get 10 hours per holiday. That would call for two different holiday tables in that regard. I know a few of our clients have overseas, employees in different countries other than the United States. So that would definitely call for a different holiday table. So maybe you have, a holiday table for Spain, maybe you have a holiday table for Germany, a holiday table for different parts of Canada. I know one of our clients has a number of employees in Canada, in different provinces or territories, and each province or territory has its own list of holidays, so each province or territory would have its own holiday table. Now, I'm actually going to skip down a little bit because the holiday table works in conjunction with what's abbreviated here as TS auto population. So that stands for timesheet auto population. So if we have the holiday table set here and we have holiday here, well, then that means that in your employees' timesheets, if you have timekeeping with us, it's going to automatically populate the holidays in this holiday table to the employee's timesheet. So that's where that comes from. Now, this can also work in tandem with their work schedule. So, typically, you'll see on here that we have holidays and then holidays and schedules, right? Most people just use holidays. Very few actually use holidays and schedules. But you can actually have, if you have holidays and schedules assigned, and you do have schedules set up for the employees, you can actually have the system fill in their timesheet with hours as well. Like I said, not used very often, but that is an option. So really, for those of you who are payroll only, we typically have the holiday table assigned to employees, but honestly, it's not really doing anything because in order to actually do something, timekeeping really needs to be turned on, and then it needs to work in tandem with this timesheet auto population profile. After that, we have labor distribution. So a labor distribution profile can actually, be used to allocate hours on a timesheet to different cost centers. So whether it's departments, whether it's jobs, you can set up a labor distribution profile to automatically do that for you, so you don't have to go into an employee's timesheet every pay period and do that. Leave of absence, we're going to skip over. We'll come down here to pay calculations next. So pay calculations, I'm sure most of you have heard me mention pay calculations before. And what pay calculations is the profile that determines what's done with the time in the timesheets. So we've talked before about raw time and calculated time, right? Well, the calculated time is what the time looks like, the employee's punches look like after the rules in the pay calculations profile has been assigned. So, the best example of those rules would be rounding rules. So if someone, punches in at 7:58, maybe a rounding rule will round it up to 8 o'clock, right? So that would be your calculated time, that punch at 8 o'clock. Another pay calc rule would be overtime. Any overtime rules that you have would be found in your pay calculations profile. So whether that's just over 40, or if you're in California, you also have daily overtime, or number of consecutive days worked, that would be in your pay calculations profile. Typically, you'll see generally for all of our clients, we at least have hourly and salaried. A salaried pay calc profile has far fewer rules than what an hourly one does. Salaried employees typically are much easier to create a pay calc profile for. After that is our pay period profile. So this is determines which payroll your employee is going to come into when you initiate payroll. I'd say most of our clients have one pay period, but there are a number, who have more than one. So in this case, you choose the correct one that the employee will be on. Finally, underneath that, we have pay prep. So what pay prep does, the pay prep profile is what ties your timesheets to payroll. So the pay prep profile, you can kind of think of it as the bridge between the timesheets and payroll. When you process the records and then sync the time, both of those are using the pay prep profile to bring those hours from the timesheets into payroll. Performance review, if you are using performance reviews in the system, this would be the profile you would sign there. Typically, again, more than likely just one of those, but maybe you do have a couple of different for various levels in the system, different levels of employees. So again, you just choose the correct one. Same thing is true for points, if you have the points module turned on as well. Retirement plan. If you have 401k or IRA or other retirement plans set up in the system, then this is where you would assign those. A couple of different things about these. This is what determines the match. If you have an employer match, that is set up in the retirement plan. So if you don't have the retirement plan assigned to the employee, then the match will not automatically, come into their pay statement. For 401ks, there are also a number of other like safe harbor limits that are in the retirement plan, along with a few other things. So it's always good, even if you don't have an employer match, we still usually set up a retirement plan profile for you to assign to your employees just to make sure that everything is still compliant. Scheduler, if you have the scheduler module turned on, this would be the profile that you would assign there. Again, typically just one of those. Security. So the security profile is a little, I think it's named a little oddly, to be honest. When most people think of the security profile, what they're really thinking of would be this up here, the access. Because what the security profile does is it determines what you can see and what you can do in the system. So if you're an employee, then your security profile is just going to allow you to see your own stuff. You can, punch in and out on your timesheet. You can request time off. You can view your pay statements. You can view your schedule. You can view your W-2. That would be your security profile. A manager security profile, would maybe allow them to see some of their employees' information. So, maybe phone number, email address, maybe home address, that sort of stuff. It'll allow them to see their employees' timesheets. It'll allow them to approve time off. It'll allow them to approve timesheets, maybe see some time reports. That would be about it. And then, of course, if you're an admin, you get access to just about everything. So again, kind of an interesting name, security, but that's what that is. Scrolling down here to timesheet. The timesheet is going to determine, again, if it has, the access profile assigned on the timesheet, that will determine where the employee can clock in and out, but it also determines how the actual view of the timesheet. So there are a number of different views, a number of different timesheet options. Bulk hours is typically used for salaried employees, and we started using start end all days for the hourly employees. I know that a number of our clients still use the timestamp or small business timesheets, but we're getting away from those because in order to use the new mobile app with timesheets, you have to use either start end all days or bulk hours. Those are the only two that now work with the new mobile app. We already discussed timesheet auto population and work schedule. So I think that's about all I'm going to cover in the profiles widget there. Okay, so moving on, over here on the right, we have badges. Badges would be used for time clocks. So if you are, either entering a badge number or if you have proximity badges or swipe badges, those numbers would be entered right here. Underneath that, we have account demographics. This is really just optional if you want to track demographical information. You can add an employee photo here on the left side of it, and then everything else, would be your typical demographical information. There is some stuff such as, primary language here, I believe marital status, really the ones that are blue that we can create, lists for you to use, or you can add to the list for yourself. Referral would be another one of those boxes, as is worker type. But yeah, for the most part, those are pretty self-explanatory. Back over here on the left, we have managers. Of course, that's where you add the manager for the employee, manager, supervisor, whatever you may call it. And of course, we can have several layers of those. Workflow delegation. So here's one that probably needs a little bit of explanation. As you know, the vast majority of you are probably know, we now use workflows for time off requesting, for approving timesheets. If you have employees who are making timesheet change requests, those are a workflow. There are a number of HR workflows as well that can be set up. If you have someone who's in charge of approving workflows, so say you have a manager who is going on vacation, they can actually set up a new workflow delegation and say, well, you know, until I come back, George, you know, Casey's going on vacation. So we'll say that George needs to handle all of Casey's workflows from December 5th, that's November. I'm sorry, November 5th through November 9th. And then once that's saved, any of the workflows that would regularly come to Casey would actually be sent to George. As you saw, you can actually choose the specific workflow type if you want a specific one. You can also choose more than one employee if you want it to go to multiple people. Let's see, underneath that we have cost centers. So this would be, so your default, so this would just basically be, you know, typically where you'd find your default departments and any other cost centers you have set up like that, you would assign under default. Now, if you want to limit, there are two options for limit. So we can say, if you want to say root, that's where our departments are set up. So you could say, that's not going to help with the root. And job someone either. So root would be if you have, you know, multiple levels for your cost centers, you could say, you know, the root could be one of the parents, and then they'd be able to choose from all of their children underneath that parent. So maybe you have, you know, department 1, and under department 1 you have 1A, 1B, and 1C. Well, if you say the root is department 1, then they'd be able to choose, you know, A, B, or C. You can also, instead of doing root, you can also list, where then you would build an actual list of the cost centers that be available to them. So in our example here right now, you know, for our departments, we're set up more like a restaurant, I would say, okay? So we could say, so let's say this would be a list for servers, right? So we could say, you know, in this case, they would have access to clock in or out to either back of house or front of house. And those would be the two options when they're clocking in and out that they could choose from if you have the limit set up to this list. Scrolling down a little further, we have our accruals here. Most of you are familiar with this box, so I won't speak on that too much. However, I will point out that if you click on Edit Accrual Balances right there on the top right-hand side, you can actually change the accrued to dates if you need to for all their accruals. You can change all of their remaining hours, and then any of those changes require a comment as well when you do make the changes. So if you do have balances that you need to change all at one time, you can come here and make those changes all at once instead of having to go to, you know, my employees and then accruals and balances and doing your changes one at a time. Over here on the right, we have account contacts. This is where you can add emergency contacts for employees. This is where you can add dependents if you're tracking those for insurance purposes maybe. It's also where you can add beneficiaries, again, for insurance purposes. And you can also, just to point this out, they can be all three. So if they're a dependent and a beneficiary and an emergency contact, you can check all three of those. Underneath that, here on the right, we have pay information. So if you have jobs set up in the system, you can assign a job there. It'll show you the last time that job was changed, the length in their current job. Standard workday can be set here, and we can use that for a number of things, including time off requests. If they request a full day off, usually that's 8 hours, because typically that's 8 hours. But if they work more, if their standard days 6 or 10, then that can pull in for their time off requests instead. Employee type, pay type. I will point out, typically these are going to be, usually employee type now is exempt, non-exempt, with your pay type being hourly, full-time, hourly, part-time, and salaried. Typically, these don't affect anything in the system. I will tell you that. However, they can be used for reporting purposes, for filtering and whatnot. So we still recommend, filling those out correctly if you can. Here's points. If you have the points module turned on, contract leave apps generally used. Okay, base compensation. So what I usually, I'll point out with base compensation. Typically, I recommend people click the plus button when someone gets a raise, or if they have, just a change in their compensation, just so you can keep track of their compensation history in the system. Always remember, if they're a salaried employee, have the salary auto pay amount earning box filled out. So that way the salary automatically pulls into payroll. And finally, I will point out this auto pay schedule. It's been down here for a little while now, but it's a relatively new feature. If they are a salaried employee, you can choose an auto pay schedule for them. And when they are hired or when they are terminated, it will prorate their schedule based on the number of days they were active for the pay period. So if you have a salaried employee, who was hired halfway through the pay period, if you're biweekly and they start the second week, then they'll only be paid half of their salary if you have this selected. Or if they're terminated and there's 3 days left in the pay period, well, then they'll be given, their salary minus those 3 days they didn't work. So that's something I know that a lot of people really wanted to have put in place in the system, and it's there now. So hopefully, you'll be able to use that. And you can also, you'll notice that by default, 7.5 hours per day and 8 hours per day. Those are the two that you'll see. Well, if you have salaried employees who work a different schedule than that, then that can also be, created as well if you need another option other than those. Rate tables we won't really talk about. Dates, those can always be, pretty much changed at any time. If you have HR, of course, we can create custom dates for you as well. I will point out that if you terminate someone and enter the wrong termination date, this just came up recently, and I know it's not the first time it's come up, then basically what I recommend that you do is just go ahead, rehire them, delete the rehired date, and then terminate them again with the correct termination date. Finally, below that, we see groups. These are just the groups that they fall into based on either, sometimes we set up manual groups and assign people to that. A lot of times they're filtered groups that they're part of, either because, of maybe a cost center they belong to or a supervisor they have. There are lots of different reasons for them to fall into groups, but that just kind of gives you a basic idea of what group they're a part of. And then if you have extra fields, those might show up down below that. I was planning on trying to get to the payroll tab and maybe talk a little about the HR tab and also the schedules tab, but we are quite a bit over time today. So maybe we will come back to those other tabs at some other time. But I really hope that this look at just the main tab itself was helpful to you. and maybe, will maybe help you do some, help you with some more tedious things in the future. So thanks for joining us today. If you want to watch this training or have, I don't see any questions, so you can certainly send those to us if you have any. But if you would like to view this session again at some point in the future, it will be on our YouTube channel more than likely by tomorrow before the end of the week. So I hope the rest of you have a good day and a good weekend.